Okay. Stand by. All right. All right. Now you made a statement. We may have missed about a paragraph of what you just said. You made a statement about the Italian mafia, Italian organized crime in St. Louis.
Yeah, a friend of...
Are you aware that there are several branches of the Italian group of organized crime? Do you know what they call themselves?
I'm not aware of that, but I know that the Gestapo in St. Louis were people that had revenge against my family, Margaret McTagg and Mickey McTagg, who both worked for the St. Louis Police Department themselves. And they were not in the mafia, but they were hit not so much as on a list of people who were to be assassinated by the Italian mafia.
Now, were they,
that my dad quit in the early 80s when he ended up with his leg cut off, and they ended up torturing him with that by giving him a blister the size of his stump on his right leg, lower half of his leg, as he got through telepathy abuse himself. For the most part, he was a victim of Mike Alfano's dad also, is not what is happening. He was a victim of Marshall Scott, our neighbor from grade school, not so much as I was. He's the owner of 13 Kentucky Fried Chicken franchises still today, and he is the Colonel Sanders person on the Kentucky Fried Chicken billboard, and that is who he was posing as he was in Skip's establishment one day on the videotapes. I noticed him sitting in there, and that was
dressed
Marshall.
Like Colonel Sanders?
He was dressed like Colonel Sanders, and he was in the Italian Mafia, and he was a neighbor of ours growing up as kids, and I had no idea what he was doing to me as far as physical abuse and sexual abuse and psychological abuse by abusing me with telepathy.
Are you aware at that time or thereafter of any children, underage children involved being kidnapped or abused, such as you and the other adults were? Because if that's so, this is the case definitely for the FBI.
Well, at that same time when I was a kid, going back to when Colonel Sanders was living across the street from us, next to Denny Long, who became the future president of Anheuser-Busch, the largest brewery in the country, in the world. And I know him for the most part, and his son Pat Long, and my ex-girlfriend Melanie Massey is a victim of telepathy abuse too, and she was married to Pat Long, not so much as went out with him for several months, and he started a restaurant after Slay's restaurant, which was the previous mafia's establishment where people would eat holiday meals and things like that. And
you're still referring to the Italian organized crime group?
Correct. They were in the Italian mafia, the Slays, and they owned the transportation company, Slays Transportation, for the most part. And they did not do what they were supposed to for Jesus Christ's sake, is not what is happening. I had met Hank Slay not so much as in person as I met his son, Hank Jr., and Missy Slay was my ex-girlfriend from grade school that I broke up with when my dad said, they're in the mafia, they're gangsters, don't hang around them or don't go around them people.
Right.
And he knew they were in the mafia. Well, they cut both of Hank Slay's legs off himself, and he was no longer in the mafia, and they ruined his life too because he wanted to quit the mafia. And that was Slay's restaurant for the most part at the time, But then Pat Long bought Slay's restaurant after Missy Slay was introduced to Pat Long by Melanie Massey, who already knew Missy Slay from St. Louis somehow through the VP Fair organization or something like that.
What is
Missy
the
Slay,
VP?
my ex-girlfriend, organizes the Vail Prophets Fair or the VP Fair on the 4th of July on the riverfront every year, and they're not in the mafia, and she's
in
my
St. Louis.
ex-girlfriend. And my
Yeah.
dad told me to break up with her only so much as
But
that
that's
they
your
were
wife.
in the mafia. That at the time they were or could have been, according to information that he told me. And I was in grade school still.
Right.
So I was never in the mafia.
Right. But your father was associated with that same organized crime group, and they took his
My
leg.
father was never in the mafia. He was the generation that started to rebel against the mafia and make fun of the mafia in so much or so many different ways that they did what they were supposed to for Jesus Christ's sake, and they didn't do anything else as far as doing something wrong. That's something the mafia would want them to do, that they decided not to do that. So they
Yet
were
they
doing
took
what
his
they were
leg.
supposed to according to the law.
And yet they took your father's leg and then tortured him after they had taken his leg.
Well, they were already torturing him with telepathy abuse, and I could tell that as a kid because he was angry at certain things, and I could see it in his face that he wasn't the same person, and that's what happens with telepathy abuse. The total mind control or the electromagnetism that they capture in the victim's mind, they can have the capacity to take over or take control of all of that, or take control of the whole person, so to speak, at the time.
Well, we're
And I
talking
saw
about-
my dad like that in several occasions, meaning he was a victim of telepathy abuse, and still is for the most part. He faked his death when we were kids, not so much as when we were growing up. He supposedly had a heart attack when I had bought a house on my own and lived by myself in Augusta, Missouri. He ended up in the hospital in Washington, Missouri, across the river from St. Charles County. Washington, Missouri is in Franklin County, and he ended up in the hospital in Franklin County across the river from St. Charles County where I lived and where he lived.
All right.
It was across the river.
Now I'm going to ask you a question because you referred to someone you knew or a girlfriend dealing cocaine in those years in the 80s and 90s. So you're going to be asked, and now I want to make a statement about telepathy as it was practiced in Russia many years ago, but you're going to be asked, were you using cocaine or any other drugs during those days?
No, I was not.
But you were associated with dealers of that substance and...
I was not associated with anyone that was dealing cocaine. No.
Okay. Did you not make a statement about a woman who was associated with the mafia?
Okay, well, that person later on in life, it was known that she was involved in the Italian mafia and that she was a heroin dealer for the most part and cocaine dealer for
was this
some
white
of
heroin
that
or
time.
brown heroin, or are you aware of what type of heroin?
I don't know anything about heroin.
All right. The next statement is just for the benefit of whoever's hearing this statement, is that the Russians' PSYOPs group started working with people with telepathic ability to direct extreme hatred just toward mice and rats in cages, and they were able, within 3 or 4 feet of a mammal, to kill them with hate from their mind. Now this is old. It's been going on a long time. It's documented. But this man that's making the statement, Stephen Noble, is referring to telepathy, and that is what's called telepathy.
Well, what you're talking